Good afternoon and welcome to the Wavy Digital Desk. I'm your host, Sarah Good. We're 1 month away from March 5th, also known as Super Tuesday, with the Virginia primary elections for the presidential election. So we are going to talk with Jesse Richmond from ODU. He is an associate professor of political science and international studies. He's joining us today. He's joined us before to sort of unpack some of this election information that we have. This is an unusual election cycle that we will get to, and we'll get his opinions on all of that. But if you do not know, here are the ballots on the screen. There is more information up on wavy.com. It is linked in the Facebook chat and also on wavy.com. So feel free to go there during this conversation to get more information and sort of follow along with what we're talking about. So I'm going to bring on Dr. Richmond now, and we're going to jump right into it. Dr. Richmond, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Great to be here.
Perfect. Well, I know there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot going on in this election that as you said yourself, is a little unusual before we jumped on this call. So I just want to jump right in the first thing. We're a month away from when people in Virginia, if they're not already early voting, will hit the polls for the primary elections. Just what are your first thoughts?
Well, so this is a really unusual situation. We haven't seen something quite like this since, I would say, about 1892. That was the last time we had someone who had been president, got defeated, decided to run again up. So that was Grover Cleveland decided he wanted his office back.
So safe to say it's unusual. It has not occurred in the last 2 centuries.
Yeah. And so that creates an unusual situation where we have, in a sense, for both parties, something like what we see normally on only one side. There's an incumbent running. And so in both cases, Trump and Biden have been pretty effective. If you look at the results of the South Carolina Democratic primary that just were reported recently, Biden got a very high percentage of the vote. Trump has been winning majorities in the 2 Republican primaries so far. And so there's an increasingly narrow path for anybody in either of those primaries who wants to try to defeat those candidates. And so that is unusual. Normally what we would see is on one side a very competitive primary, at least sometimes both sides a very competitive primary. This time we really are seeing something less than that. There's still competition, but I was struck as you pulled up that scroll initially of the candidates on the ballot. Well, on the Republican side, quite a few of the candidates on the ballot are they're not even running campaigns anymore. They've shuttered their campaigns. The campaigns are on hold, and so you can vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, but he's not really running anymore. You can vote for Chris Christie. He's not really running anymore, right? And so there's this really rapid winnowing of the candidates, much more rapid than we usually see. Usually, Virginia Super Tuesday, we are at the fulcrum of that decision point. If you think about the last cycle, Joe Biden had some ups and downs in the earlier primaries. It was Super Tuesday and his strong performance there that allowed him to really solidify his lead in the Democratic primary. And we'll see. It could be that there'll be some surprises coming forward. Nikki Haley is competing next in South Carolina. It's her home state. She knows the state very well. She's performing considerably better there in the state polling that's been released, which is not very much, but she's performing quite a bit better than she is nationally. So it looks like she might have a pretty good night there, but a pretty good night for her still looks like probably getting defeated quite handily by Donald Trump. If that doesn't happen, if Trump doesn't get the sort of 25 to 30% above Haley lead that he's expecting, if instead it's a very narrow, that could give some fresh life to the Haley campaign. Maybe she's able to really enter Super Tuesday in a position where she has a active shot at becoming the nominee, or at least giving Trump a really long and intense run for it on the Democratic primary side, the Republican primary side. Democratic primary side, it looks like, barring some kind of absolute disaster for the Biden campaign. Biden is on a glide path to be the nominee. Uh, there's some weird things. If you look at the betting markets, the odds of Biden becoming the Democratic nominee still aren't, they're about 2/3, which seems low to me. I guess people are betting on some kind of health crisis or something. I'm not sure. And if you look just at what's happening politically, you have an incumbent president, two opposition candidates, neither of whom has managed to win much vote at all in the first official primary, didn't do terribly well in the New Hampshire primary when Biden wasn't even on the ballot. He still won very
Right,
effectively as
with
a
that
write-in
write-in
candidate.
campaign, yeah.
And so, neither, they're not catching fire, it seems like. Maybe something will change, but it seems likely that we'll have a rematch of Trump versus Biden in the general election going forward, which again is very unusual. We haven't seen a rematch of the same two candidates against each other for a long time. It's been a little longer, a little bit more recently, but William Jennings Bryan ran against McKinley twice. That's still more than a century ago. And so it's an unusual situation to have a rematch, as well as even more unusual, right? Only happened really once in American history before, of a former president running against a current president, trying to wrestle that office back.
Absolutely. And I mean, you talk about too the primaries. Haley said she was going to get to South Carolina. Well, that's all taking place obviously before Super Tuesday. So even though people are early voting, even though people are probably going to the polls in Virginia, that can really change in a month. She might also not be in the running, come March 5th.
Yeah, it's possible, and a lot depends on how the next couple of primaries go. There hasn't been much state level polling, but the national polling does not look very good for Haley. She's about 20% of the Republican primary vote. That's second place, but it's way behind Donald Trump, and so that's a challenge. The the advantage she has is that she's the last one standing, and so there's less. I think sometimes when there are a number of candidates, there's pressure from supporters to try to coordinate, right? Who's going to have the best shot at winning and that sort of thing. She's the last one against Trump. She's planning to continue for a while, but as we've seen, candidates often are planning to continue for a long time until they realize or they decide that they're not anymore,
Right.
and that could happen.
I mean, we're
I
seeing
think,
here, not to cut you off, but from the debates, do you think that made a big difference for Trump's campaign, or maybe that's what hurt people? Is like they weren't actually debating Trump; they were debating each other. You heard that sentiment sort of throughout that season there.
yeah. So Trump has stayed away from debates. Biden has not debated either, and I think the strategy of not debating is sometimes a strategy of simply trying not to give your opponents an opportunity to have some breakout moment against you. You're way ahead. The low risk strategy is sometimes to just simply not debate. And that seems to be what the Trump campaign decided to do. They tried to do counter programming. They had Trump doing an interview or Trump doing a rally or other things to kind of counter program on the times when the debates were, and they just wouldn't debate. So that was a strategic choice the Trump campaign made, but it's also reflecting in some ways Trump's discomfort with debates in the last couple of cycles. As you may remember, he got into various kinds of fights with the journalists asking questions at debates and said various not nice things about people who were moderating. He is I thought he's been building towards not doing much debating for a while, and the current RNC rules, which Trump played a role in creating, are that whoever the Republican nominee is supposed to be committed to not take part in the Commission on Presidential debates in the fall. Trump played a role in creating those. It's Trump's people running the party for the most part, and I think it's quite likely that Trump is going to continue to avoid debates, not only in the primaries, but in the general election. Biden also seems a bit chary of debates. He hasn't debated the candidates in the Democratic primary. Now they're way behind him in the polling, so that's arguably a reason to not debate and so forth. But currently, neither the DNC or the RNC has committed to take part in the Commission on Presidential debates. So that's this may be the end this cycle of a tradition that we've had for a long time. We've had the presidential debates since 1976, every 4 years, and they usually draw huge ratings. Lots of people tune in to watch these. But the debates have, are really potentially on the rocks, which I think is unfortunate because they're at times that lots of people tune in. They're an opportunity for the candidates to make their case and to try to counter argue against the opponent's case. On live television, it gives people a chance to evaluate both candidates. But it's quite possible that Trump and Biden as well are going to decide that this is a risk not worth taking. They're both getting older, and there's a real demand in terms of stamina, in terms of on your feet action, and there's a risk for both sides in terms of making missteps. They may simply want to avoid debates this fall, which we'll see. We'll see how it develops.
And with Trump, I do want to ask, I mean, there's a little bit of fire this morning, I think, Trump talking about the RNC chair and things like that. But, for the most part, Trump, is in the narrative really this week too because of the Supreme Court's decision that's coming up on Colorado and all of that. But then you also have Biden, obviously very attached to the federal government and what's happening. So I don't know, it's just very interesting how these two candidates that could end up being, the two for the general election, there are so much news surrounding them outside of just the presidential election. You have so much, I don't want to say gossip, but, there's just so much pop culture, memes of them. And, Haley was even on SNL this weekend. And, you have a lot of other sort of chatter that is able to sort of go along when you're not really at debate. So you're not really just on the campaign trail. That it seems, I don't know, it's interesting to me. I mean, have you seen this much fuss sort of outside of the candidates before? Or is this unique to the Biden and Trump narrative that's going on?
Well, so Biden as president, of course, one of the advantages and disadvantages of being the incumbent president is that you're always in the news because you're the leader of the country and you're doing things or foreign policy issues that you have to address. There are domestic policy issues you have to address. There's legislation. There's 1,000 different things that the sitting president is involved with. That can be sometimes a challenge, sometimes a distraction for the incumbent president. Obama criticized the Biden campaign a few weeks ago, arguing that Biden needed to move more of his key advisors more into a campaign-focused role because he thought that this needed attention in a way it wasn't getting. But so there are distractions for the incumbent president too. But now that gets you in the news. Trump is an incredibly skilled media magnet. He knows how to draw news cycles to himself. And he has honed that capacity over decades in the private sector. And then he's had almost 10 years now in politics, and he continues to be extraordinarily good at keeping the narrative, keeping the news cycle built around him. And currently, partly that's built around him because of all of these indictments, the court cases, the results that have gone against him so far in terms of the New York fraud trial, the liability for defamation, all of this sort of thing. It's sometimes negative coverage, but Trump has operated throughout his political career, it seems like, on the aphorism that all news is good news. Being in the media, being in the press is something that he is very good at getting. Even if it's negative, he seems to be able to profit from it.
Right. I mean, and that is interesting for voters as well. Do they even care, I guess, is one side of it. And then, does it even impact their voting decision right now? I mean, the RNC, so they're saying that they're having their worst fundraising year in about a decade. Yet, obviously, Trump is beyond that. He can control his own sort of fundraising, publicity, etc. So,
yeah, the Trump on fundraising, his fundraising reports also came out recently, and they burned through a lot of money in the last year. They didn't have a net positive in terms of inflow versus outflow, and partly that reflects the costs of these court cases. They've been spending a lot of money on fighting the legal issues that threaten Trump's candidacy. So it's I think overall, one of the things we've seen over the last several cycles is that it used to be, the expectation was Republicans had an advantage on fundraising. That really doesn't seem to be the case currently. If anything, it would appear that Democrats have a substantial advantage on fundraising. And so you see that with the RNC, you see that to a degree with the Trump campaign. And so Trump is potentially going to be running with less resources than he might like to have. He has famously been quite successful at raising money. That will likely continue to an extent. At the same time, the general fundraising challenges of the Republican Party probably will continue to create problems for Trump as well.
And I know that we will probably jump back in some variation of this conversation once we for sure know who the candidates are going into the general election. But for now, we've seen, in the fall it played out, Virginia leaned more Democratic, at least in terms of, voting for their state legislature. Is that something that you think we're going to see in terms of how people are voting, in the primary and the general? Now, in the primaries in Virginia, it is interesting because you choose which one you hop into. So even if you're a Democrat, you could vote in the Republican primary, if it's a tight race. Is that how it works? Is that how they want people to vote?
Well, so certainly that's how the Haley campaign might like to have some people vote. This helped Haley in New Hampshire when independents were able to vote in the Republican primary, and that aided the Haley campaign to a degree. There's some people who would very much like to see Trump not on the ballot, and no matter what your normal party affiliation is, you can choose to vote in either party's primary. So that could happen. The broader issue of the structure of the primaries here, right? We have an open primary, and we have a number of candidates on it. People can choose where to vote. Normally, people don't cross over from one party to the other in very large numbers. I think it's unlikely that the Haley campaign is going to be saved by some influx of liberal Democrats. Most people who might ordinarily vote in the Democratic primary are going to vote in the Democratic primary, and many of those people don't like Haley that much on the issues and so forth. They may like her better than Trump, but I don't think she's going to be, her campaign's not likely to be saved by that alone.
And, before we end, I know we're about out of time here, I do want to ask, are there certain things that we need to watch out for the Trump-Biden election that could occur? Are people do you see people not being as excited to vote, or do you see people not being as excited to participate, knowing that they're sort of entering in, another version of this race that they've already sort of gotten through?
I think it's complicated. Currently, I think there is a little bit less excitement and less engagement because the primary campaigns seem likely to go to a pretty clear conclusion. So there's less uh, opportunity for people to get excited about participating to help out some particular candidate, given that it seems likely. But nonetheless, despite that, it could go a variety of ways. I think people should still take part. It's an important exercise in civic participation. This is the opportunity to shape who the choices are. If you look at the national polling, there are lots of people who say they don't really want a Trump-Biden rematch. Well, if you don't want a Trump-Biden rematch, this is your chance to avoid it. And so as voters, on Super Tuesday, this is a crucial decision point. If the Trump-Biden rematch isn't going to happen, it's not going to happen because of something that happens in Virginia and the other Super Tuesday states. And so that's important. Similarly, if you do support Trump and Biden, you want that matchup, well, you know how to vote in those primaries. As we go forward, it's going to be, I think, in some ways similar to 2020, but in other ways very different, right? 2020 was an odd election cycle in terms of the pandemic. That made it hard to campaign in a normal way, and a lot of other things going on. A different set of issues this time. At the same time, and we know more about each candidate. We've seen the way things developed after the 2020 election. People have very polarized views on that. Trump has managed to persuade many of his supporters that the election was stolen from him. Many other people think Trump tried to steal an election. It's taking place in an atmosphere that is in some ways even more poisoned by these kinds of this kind of distrust. And that's a challenge going forward.
And it's unique too that both of them, you can actually look at how their 4 years as president, how successful that was. I mean, you have a pure example of a Biden administration versus a Trump administration.
Right. You have, in some ways, exactly parallel, right? Biden had 2 years with a Democratic majority in Congress, and what did he get done in terms of legislation, and how was he governed as president over 3.5 years? Trump, you have the Trump administration, 2 years with the Republican majority, and how did Trump conduct himself? And so it is going to, in some ways, be a double retrospective assessment in ways people aren't always able to do, because exactly they've seen both. And as the campaign goes on, I think that each of them is going to be trying to make the case that he's better prepared to lead America in the next 4 years, given both what happened during his presidency and what happened in the other's presidency. And so I expect it's likely to be quite negative in terms of attacks on the other. And the other thing we haven't talked about, but I think it's important to also keep an eye on, is the potential for third-party candidates. The polling suggests that people are feeling somewhat less attached to the major political parties than they have in recent years, and that there's a substantial number of people who are sort of testing the water about maybe supporting a third-party candidate. And so it will be really fascinating to see whether that develops, because if it's a 3-candidate race, that has different dynamics in some important ways. And we haven't seen a real three-candidate race since Ross Perot ran for president in '92, I think.
And is that something that you expect to pop up as a potential option after sort of this primary season when we really just move into the general?
Well, a lot depends on how effectively possible third-party candidates are able to get on the ballot, how readily they can accomplish that, how readily they are able to maintain and develop public support. And so, if you look at some of the polling with multi-candidate races, you have Trump and Biden in the 30s, and a significant portion of the electorate going to other candidates. Kennedy getting the most. That change adds some interesting strategic challenges for the campaigns that I don't think they've necessarily reckoned with all the way. In a three-candidate race, running the kind of negative campaign that both parties have gotten really comfortable running in recent years is risky, because every time you tear down one opponent, that the public could switch not to you, but to the other candidate. And so I'm not sure that they have really thought through that challenge yet. We'll see if the strategists are able to adjust to that challenge. But I think if they don't react to that in a smart way, it could really open the possibility for third-party candidates to do surprisingly well.
That's interesting. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, as well as, just in general, what happens in the primary, and then, what the general election is going to end up looking like. Dr. Richman, I don't want to take up any more of your time as you get back to hopefully maybe some minds of tomorrow for their political run or their interest in politics. I mean, that's my last thing I did want to ask you. Are you seeing people on campus excited by all of this? Are you seeing them interested in class? Do you bring in some of these, current event examples and anything?
Oh, of course. Seeing a variety of things. The students are engaged. I think there's a real search on the part of students for what is the path forward for us as a country in terms of how do we work to solve the challenges the country faces? How do we build a better future? And I think that has students sometimes in partisan corners, but sometimes not. Sometimes really exploring, trying to find ways to engage across the political spectrum in the search of good ideas and effective approaches to the real challenges we face as a country. And that gives me a certain degree of hope as I look at the future. I think the students are engaged. They're trying to figure out how to best navigate the challenging situations the country faces, and hopefully all of us together will be able to do that going forward.
Well, Dr. Richman, thank you so much. I feel like that's a great place, to end it on an optimistic note, and we'll check back in hopefully with you, down the line as we sort of figure out how this election cycle is shaping up. But thank you so much for all of your expertise. It was so interesting, just hearing about the history of sort of the situation that we're in and sort of what it could look like, going into the next few months.
You're very welcome, Sarah. Great to talk.
Great to talk. Thank you.